Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another Live Black Experience Community Dialogue. I am excited for this conversation tonight. We have a wonderful panel of speakers for a kitchen table talk in which we talk about several issues. But tonight we are primarily focusing around a conversation about the Woman King and some of the controversies that have come out of the release of that film. A lot of conversation about the significance of it and conversation about why it's caused such a stir in Hollywood and in critiques of the film and the contributions that it's making towards other conversations about representation in film, the role of women in film, the role of Black women in particular in film, casting, uh, femininity, and so many other topics tonight. So we're going to go ahead and pull up our panel, and we'll have each person introduce themselves, and we'll dive right into our conversation. So I'm going to call on you as you're coming up on my screen. I'll start with Dr. Tria Allen.
Hello, good people. I'm Dr. Tria Allen. I am the DEI focused instructional support specialist at the University of Arizona and creator of the African American Studies, department program at Pima Community College. So glad to be with you one more time.
Thank you so much. Dr. Ann Hart. You're on mute.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for this opportunity to be here again to engage at the kitchen table talk. Miss all of you. I am by trade a retired superintendent from the Department of Education, and I'm a strategic civic community and education advocate, which crosses a lot of areas. And I'm very passionate about the well-being and humanity of our culture, our womanhood, our community, and our students.
Thank you for being here. Dr. Mary Roth.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. Bienvenidos a todos. My name is Mary Roth. I have had the privilege and the honor to have engaged in a range of discussions and community gatherings through the Live Black Experience. I'm currently the Ethnic Studies Department Chair at Stan State in California. And I'm so excited about this conversation. I wanted to see the Woman King film ever since I became aware of the trailer, because I've been teaching about the Dahomey, quote unquote, Amazon since 2012, when I was actually a faculty member at NAU.
Thank you. And Dr. Ramona Curtis.
Hi, I am Ramona Curtis, and I serve as the director for workforce programming at Tulsa Community College, and I'm also a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. And I am happy to be here. And likewise, I love The Woman King. I was caught off guard by the boycott. So as soon as we talked about having this discussion, I certainly wanted to be on this panel, and I'm happy to be on a panel with such wonderful, talented, intelligent Black women.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here tonight. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Let's just start talking about the film itself. What was your reaction to seeing that it was coming out? Why is it so significant? Let's start with you, Ms. Curtis.
So for me, the excitement, first of all, I love Viola Davis. Anything she's in, I'm a TGIT woman. Anything that she's in, I love her rhetoric on Black women and in Hollywood and getting our due. But I especially was excited about the movie because we have a female producer, we have a predominantly women cast, the supporting actress and the lead actresses, all African American women. And just to see African American women on the stage, all throughout the movie, showing their strength and their beauty that sometimes goes unnoticed by others. And I was hoping that the movie would even bring it out. And I don't know if you all felt the same way I did when they would shine up using the palm oil. I was just like, oh my gosh, so much of our our culture, and it's just being presented in a way that is truly respected. We live in that paradigm of the strong Black woman, and it can cause a lot of mental health pieces to us today if we would be honest with ourselves as African American women. But to see that strength, that's the kind of strength that just makes you proud to be an African American woman, and see that strength to be portrayed to those who come out and watch the movie, and just to have a shero in the mix. I loved it. I loved it on every front, and I was taken aback by the boycott. Totally caught me off guard. And I will say this, and this might start the controversy, but I was taken aback when I was reading that the majority of those within our culture who were boycotting were African American males. And I just tried to find that, because I heard about the boycott before I watched the movie, excited about the movie, watched the movie, and just could not understand that piece. I could not understand that piece because there was male pride for the African American woman in that movie. Those pieces were there, and so I still was a bit perplexed by the fact that this was taking place.
Yeah. Let's go through the rest of folks' initial response to the film, and then we're going to dive right into the boycott and some of that controversy next. But Dr. Rofe, you shared about the teachings that you've been doing for a while on the Dahomey, and as the original Amazons, and just share. I'd love to hear what your initial response was to seeing that the film was coming out, and how that contributed to your teaching, or how it elevated some of what you've been doing for a while now.
Thank you, Kara. Well, I will say that when I saw the trailer for The Woman King, my first question was, how much is this connected to the wild popularity of the first Black Panther film, released in, I believe, 2018, with the all-woman guard for King T'Challa, which are called the Dora Milaje. And I said, well, since 2012, when I was actually teaching anthropology and ethnic studies courses at NAU, I was teaching and compiling my content for the gender section. And I was looking for examples of critical cross-cultural gender, right, kind of the range of the ways that different societies and different cultures have constructed gender. And that is when I first stumbled upon the Dahomey women warriors. And what always resonated with me with constructions of femininity, and I want to say within the larger decolonial framework of understanding that societies and cultures all over the globe for thousands of years have had more than two categories for gender. They have had multiple. If we look at Two-Spirit with US-based Native American, one culture in particular, and I got a lot of flack for this when I presented this on this at NAU, current day Indonesia had 5 gender categories. And so what I've always known deeply inside at a spiritual level is that I have not ever fit within notions of white supremacist, colonialist, patriarchal, heteronormative, elitist gender. It's a coffin box construction where femininity writ large is construed as, on the one hand, weak, submissive, subpar, not integrated, not holistic, ruled by hysterical emotions. But then on the other hand, when we look at how femininity, going back to Pachamama, going back to Mother Earth herself, going to the creative source of only women can create life, not in isolation, right? And how that's been so stigmatized and so demonized. I never fit within those constrictions of that particular construction of gender. And for thousands of years, non-Western societies have never fit within those constrictions of gender. Also appreciating that this all-woman elite guard emerges out of colonization, in particular around a different form of enslavement, which is chattel slavery. And so, and I also wondered about Hollywood is seeing dollars and cents. I mean, let's look at where the rubber meets the road. And I was very curious as soon as I saw the first Black Panther film. I'm like, are we going to have obviously the all woman guard for King T'Challa is loosely based off of this actual historic all woman guard, elite guard of the Dahomey, which is current day Benin in West Africa. I was like, are we going to have a movie that actually goes back and traces that genealogy and the source of that? So I was very excited to see that, in fact, we did get that with this film. And just like Dr. Curtis shared, I love Viola Davis. I just almost categorically support everything she does. And so I was very excited to see her at the helm of this film. And that is what led me to actually watch the film and to be a part of this discussion.
Thank you. Dr. Hart.
In hearing about the Woman King, I was just interested in the fact that there was solidarity. I think that's what's lacking in our society as women. That was the most impressive piece to me based on the trailer. So not even speaking about what I thought of actually seeing the movie. And I'm also just got finished reading Viola Davis' book, Finding Myself, and knowing the importance of what it meant to her to really, get the truth out there, truth to power, get away from colorism. That dark is beautiful, is precious, it's everything, and you're going to see that in this. I'm going to make sure. And she spoke about it on several talk shows. Her strength and how she was denied opportunities to be herself, to survive despite the obstacles or personal obstacles, the infrastructure of racism that that we all go through as women, but in a higher level, what she experienced, not being able to enter her own narrative into movies such as The Help. I read her narrative about how she wasn't able to really show that Hollywood side of The Help that she was in was more displayed than actual message that she wanted to be out there. I was excited about the voice behind her role and the voices behind other Black women who are going to play formidable roles in this Woman King, and even bringing the dynamic Adrienne Warren from Tina Turner into this. I thought that was a courageous move too. It shows that how she fit into this role. But I also think that it's very important to display how Black women should or did have each other's back, just because it's important to show the passion and how you're more successful together in a bundle than you are as a stick. And just the strength behind it, the courage, to see the natural, organic women. They're going to be displayed and achieving objectives and fighting together. That piece was what enticed me initially. Of course, following that, there were different things that I was happy to see. But I'm a woman that believes in solidarity amongst us. We don't have to like each other, but when it's important, you want to live like this was displayed. If you don't stick together, you're going to die. And if you're going to die, die for the cause. Have each other's back. There's so many narratives and messages in The Woman King, but the solidarity piece was one that holds true and fast for me.
I love it. Dr. Allen.
So I might be the only one here who was like, Woman King, not interested. And that is because, you know, like when I see Hollywood do stories about us, it's not, I don't know. There's something about Black womanhood that Hollywood never gets right. So I was not interested. It was actually my good sis, Mary Rove, Dr. Mary Rove down here, who was like, first of all, let me just tell you about how I've been teaching. And so I was like, okay, because I'm going to hype my sister. So I took my sister, my oldest sister, to go with me. And I said, hey, come and watch this movie with me. I have to sit at the table with really smart women and I need to know what I'm talking about. And that opening scene, you know, not to give away spoilers, is what roped me in. Like these heavily moisturized bodies that appear out of nowhere in this tall savanna grass, and they stand there. Like, it is the best, for me, this is the best part of this movie. And from there, I was just enamored, right? So, you know, we studied the Dahomey kingdom, and we kind of hit on also the Agojay, right? So who the Dora Milaje are framed after, loosely based after. But I gotta be honest with y'all, I was like, so now we want to go historical. Is this a my thought was, do you want your version of Black Panther? Is this why this is here? And then when I got into the theater, it was something completely different. Like you're almost able to like drown out all the noise, and you are sucked into the story of what it takes, even though it's like loosely historically based. And some conversations didn't happen. Gina Price, I think her name is Blythe Wood, y'all correct me on this, the director, was like, oh no, we did research. We did actual research to make sure the costumes were right, to make sure the people are right. And I think that is probably one of the reasons, if you go the first time, you're like in awe because of the art. But you go the second and the third time because this movie is so layered, right? So I'm working on like time number 4, the fourth time that I've seen this movie, and every time you go, you see something different. So I think that was the draw after Dr. Rofe was like, oh no, you got to go see it because I teach on this, and this is why you have to go and see it. And from there, I have made the investment, and I'm seeing it again tomorrow.
I want to kind of hone in on something that you just said, just about the layered narrative of it, and the amount of research that went into the telling of the story, and the push for not only accurate portrayal, but also of just the positive portrayal of Black women and a new form, or a different form at least, of femininity, particularly Black femininity. So let's talk about those layers and just what stood out to you, or what really contributed to the importance of this film, I guess. Just overall, it feels very like a very significant moment in Hollywood. And I'd like to dive into your thoughts of why that is.
And this is me. I'm gonna go first, y'all. Is that okay? Okay. I think one of the biggest things, the misconceptions that we have is that our history is rosy, right? And that our history has to be perfect because we feel like we're carrying the weight of our race on it. Here we're able to kind of really dig into our actual history, not just of these powerful women, but also the role that our own history, who actually participated in, the enslavement of Africans globally, not just shadow slavery, but globally. So you get to see that, and there's this moment in the film where they pan to Ouida, which is a port, and you see like white Europeans or people who are representative of the Caribbean and South America. And immediately I started to get vexed because I'm like, oh, here comes the white savior. But immediately you understand, like, oh, no, we're not even dealing with the Europeans. They're really marginal to this actual story, right? So we start to actually look at the history and what all is present in that history, who all were the participants. But even beyond there, then you also start to see like elements of of this of this community, of this kingdom, the different roles, and how gender is not based on westernized notions of women do this work and men do this work. And this principle of duality, right? So that one is not stronger, one sex is not stronger than the other, but actually without each other, we're not very strong. It also like leads you into studying the other parts of our history. So why do we have the Agojai? Like, why do we have them to begin with? And then if you're not paying attention, you don't realize that the Oyo Empire, and I cannot remember this guy's name to save my life because I wasn't focused on him, but they have, Dahomey has been under the foot of the Oyo Empire. So them having to pay tribute, them having to like pay to use their own land from the Oyo Empire, and how the slave trade has significantly reduced the balance of society, right? So that the women warriors rise up, right? And we come in at 1823. These brilliant, strong, beautiful women had been around since the 1600s, right? So we're seeing Dahomey at the end of its reign or headed into the end of its reign. And so the complexity of that, I'm going to leave it to everyone else to talk about sisterhood and what true sisterhood looks like, what unification looks like, regardless of where you came from. Because the Dahomey weren't just, these women warriors were not just Dahomey. Some of them were Mao, some of them were Oyo. Like there is so much in here about how these women can come from different spaces and places, but then their allegiance is to protecting Dahomey, the kingdom, and how they find meaning within unification with each other. Y'all don't even let me get into leadership and mentorship and mental well-being and health. All of this stuff is in here. And if you're not careful and you fall into the habit of, as my good sis tells me all the time, using westernized white femininity to really understand this story, you will miss the intricate value that is communicated as a love letter to Black women, to Black society globally, and not just here in the United States.
Beautiful. Who wants to take it next? Dr. Rope?
I am soaking all of that in. Knowledge rooted in love is what I feel, Sister Tria. It's what I feel. This is so nuanced, Kara. It's such a rich question. It's so multi-layered. And what the warrioresses of Dahomey showed is this full integration of the masculine with the feminine in the entire spectrum. And the cornerstone of this was, and I love how seamlessly it was integrated in terms of the research that was done. And there's a whole market for scholars. We are being vetted and courted now more by Hollywood than we are in the K through 12 or higher education systems. If you look at Nelson George and his role as the resident historian for the latest Elvis biopic, for example, and reconnecting with our ancestral spirituality and the Orisha and the altars, the altares, because this has been spread all over the diaspora, and the dreams that Viola Davis's character was having and how she was being advised, right? This spiritual kind of advisor who was and consultant who was the interpreter of the dreams, and how she really depicts in subtle and yet ineffably powerful ways the transformation from a warrior in this particular historic juncture of slavery as an ancient institution, and it took a radically different form when it came to the transatlantic slave trade and chattel slavery. And when she's having the dreams interpreted, and with the person of the Oyo that Sister Tria was describing, that they were really conscripted into paying tribute. It was a very feudal system, right? It was kind of like in this larger context of feudalism in that historic era. And full circle, this was the actual perpetrator of a heinous crime, spoiler alert, against Viola Davis when she was very young. And part of her pathway of becoming a warrior, and then the next elevation of that was becoming a spiritual warrior, was reconnecting with that trauma, working through that pain, and coming full circle in these really, I don't want to give away, right? I don't want to do any more spoiler alerts, but this notion of ancestral African spirituality as being holistic, as containing the duality and even transcending it with the pantheon of the Orisha, and of paying homage to that, and how that really equipped her not only in showing up in the particular ways that she did, but also in terms of the entire collective. And I'm kind of, I don't want to go into too much detail because I don't want to divulge too much of the film, and even how reconnecting with that ancestral pathway is truly so healing, and it integrates. Healing means whole. It means integrating, right? It means integrating all of the disparate parts of ourselves, versus Western colonialist frameworks is all about disunity and fragmentation and divisiveness and divide and conquer that we see played out in this kind of latter part of the Dahomey society. And then the last nuance that I appreciate is that this film showcases the historic role of the Portuguese in the transatlantic slave trade. In the U.S., we're part of an entire diaspora. And in the U.S., we most often think about the British, and it was the Arab nations, and then the Portuguese and the Spanish who were front and center in the transatlantic slave trade in the 1500s. And this is why the character that's really, to me, like very archetypal of the man who comes back, and he's a romantic interest. I'm so glad that, didn't end up being consummated literally, because he was representing setting the timeline back to his mother was from Dahomey originally, and his father was white and Portuguese. And part of the reason he came on this quote unquote expedition was because this was his mother's homeland. And it kind of shows this continuity and this living legacy that no amount of colonization, of white supremacy, anti-Blackness being the cornerstone of white supremacy, cannot stamp that out, because the ancestors are undeniable. They are an irrepressible force of life and of truth and of justice and of love. And to see that all of these layers, I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on here. And I think that that was handled so intentionally and so mindfully and tenderly in a way, because when I first saw the trailer, I was like, oh, hell no. One of the warriors going to end up with a colonizer. That's actually not what happens. And so it resonates on so many different levels, in speaking to the appeal of this, because it is so multi-layered and it is so holistic, is that when I went to see the film, I was really surprised that the other patrons were not Black. They were from all different backgrounds. And what I noticed was that there were young girls and teenage girls and women who were cheering. I was like, you mean I can actually vocalize? Because I normally only do that when I'm in a theater where the majority of the patrons are Black. But this film is really striking a chord with girls from every background, which was really unexpected for me. And I think it's due to the complexity and the nuance and the layers of Sister Treya that you described.
Professor Curtis, you're muted.
Oh, I'm so glad you. I'm so sorry. I can't tell you how many times that happens at work. But I am so glad you brought up non-African Americans at the movie, and I feel like I need to go and watch the movie again to relax. When I come into movies that are predominantly Black and there's a piece to history in it, I'm always afraid of how that story is going to be told, and will it continue to normalize, or will it, because in reading about the boycott before and discussing how whether or not, or this woman's tribe still sold their people into slavery, I was so worried that, I'm going to go see this movie. It's going to be a little bit about that. And then whiteness is going to get normalized. And that, see, y'all saw y'all's people. I mean, I just had that fear that was going to be it. I'm going to go watch it, but I have got to make sure that I'm meticulously looking for how that's going to impact 2022 with what's going on with these different House bills and critical race theory. And I want to be able to relax with movies like this. I always say, I've got to watch a movie that has a historical piece to it. I have to watch that on Friday. So that, because I got the whole weekend to process it mentally before I go back to work at a predominantly white campus. So, those are those things that I think about. So from a historical perspective, I couldn't relax till almost the end when I heard Viola Davis say, let's sell palm oil. We don't have to sell our people. so I was looking for that. The other piece I was looking for too is the femininity and the way that we would be portrayed as African American women. And is too much of that strength, that He-Man strength of the soldier, gonna shadow our beauty? Can others? I'm always thinking about how others are gonna look at us because of the paradigms we live within today, and when pop culture projects or shows us. Now, what's the fallout from that? And I'm sorry, y'all, I couldn't relax. I'm just telling you. Maybe the second time I see it, I can. But at the end, I can tell you I did. But that contributes to the weight of the African American female in making sure that our story is told right, that it's told in a way that's going to bring the beauty, the empress, the queen out in it. And so I don't know if you guys, I struggle with, Peter Bell calls Black emotional pain this inability to be at peace with your own identity, but even the intersection of being a Black woman and watching this film, making sure historically I'm watching it through that lens. I'm looking at it through the femininity lens. I'm looking at it through the sexual exploitation lens. I'm looking at it through faith and community is what binds us together. I'm looking at it through that. I'm looking at it through generational lenses. And I'm even thinking about what we've lost generationally. And that movie captured that need to inspire younger Black women, that need to train up younger Black women, that need to take on that responsibility to do that. So I found myself just really being a critic of the movie and not just watching it because I'm being protected of my race and gender. And so that was what was hard for me, because I was somewhat upset reading the I'm just telling you guys how I came into this as an African American woman, reading about the boycott, and to find that out. And I was just like, I can't relax watching this movie because I want to make sure that when I walk out of here, I'm going to feel okay. And my other sisters are going to be okay about this movie. And I did. But now I want to watch it again just to watch it.
Thank you all for all of that. I want to start diving into some of the reception to the film. So we're going to talk about the boycott. But one of the things that struck me was the immediate capturing of the headlines when the movie was released, when it performed well at the box office. Almost every headline I saw was saying something like this one: The Woman King surprises with 19 million at the box office. It was already projected to do just a few million short of that number. But at the same time, we had the release of, I can't even think of the name of the film now, the Florence Pugh film that was released around the same time, critically kind of lambasted, surrounded with controversy that The Woman King was not at the time. And it was praised for bringing in between 16 and 18 million dollars, despite being critically kind of torn apart. This film was critically praised, and yet it was considered a surprise that it did so well. So I'm wondering what your views are on why it came as such a surprise, when there was so much positive press about it, when just from the time that it was launched with the first trailers, there was excitement about it, and yet it was a surprise that it did so well. Dr. Hart, I'll start with you on this one.
So I think the culture that we're living in right now, it is so tumultuous. It's full of hate, vitriol. It disconnects us to the moral cause of what we're supposed to be about, living in a society, living amongst one another, of all races and backgrounds and ethnicities. It was an opportunity to see power displayed by um, femininity at its best. I mean, femininity in the eyes of others and to many looks different. I mean, we think of femininity being one way and it looks different to everyone else. I think it was just for me, like, yes, this is going to be someplace where, and I can see where we can be powerful. I, as an educator, I see this being a lesson for young girls of all ages of how to decision making, strategies, the course, the pathways that you take, and the outcome, the obstacles, the abuse, domestic violence, decisions that are made to help you with your journey. Um, Being Viola Davis and knowing what her platform is and what her narrative has been all along, and being overlooked for major roles and opportunities in her career. I don't know why that our capitalistic society would be shocked that this would bring in the money that it did, but it clearly shows that our hearts and souls are ache for the powerful display of women who can be a force and a narrative that feeds to other souls and to people who have experienced these things, but in a way that it looks different to us all. We're not necessarily warriors out there in the jungle fighting. And, like I said to my daughter after the movie, everything that these warriors went through, the damage, the hurt, the pain, the fighting, they just receive little or no aid at all in terms of, actual stitches, band-aids, or anything to help them overcome the scars and pain. What does that really mean? I mean, was that the Hollywood piece? Or, I mean, some of these instances you would thought they would have not have survived. But it also shows that the struggle is real, and what doesn't kill you can only make you stronger. It's an education at many platforms with the layers that we spoke about. But I think our culture, the climate in which we're living under, I think it was empowering for everyone to want to see it at every level. I know many men who went to see this and enjoyed it and have gone to see it 2 or 3 times and applauded and spoke openly and positively about the role of these warrior women. They loved it. And it's something that we need to see now. I think it represents where we can go if we stick together.
Any other thoughts on the surprise response, or shall we dive right into the boycott?
The surprise response, the surprising, it opens with 19 million. I don't have the data to back this up, but I know that we pushed Black Panther to well over 100 plus in just this country alone. So if it is just me going to see this movie 4 or 5 times after I'm gathered lovingly by my good sis, this doesn't surprise me. But headlines like this do, because I'm like, y'all think that we all we want to see is a Marvel movie? No disrespect to Marvel, I'm a big fan. But you think that all we want to see is a Hope Floats? That all we want to see is Enough? Or any of these other movies where we have centered women as the warrior in a contemporary status. So this idea that it's surprising lets me know that we're still laboring, this society is still laboring under this idea that nobody wants to hear these stories, and that white will still be right. We still need a savior. That savior still needs to be a man, preferably a white man. That we still need specific types of blackness in order for it to be palatable for the rest of the intelligent world and sometimes the unintelligent world. So this headline, I'm not shocked that it did well after seeing it like 4 times myself. I am shocked that we're still conceptualizing that. Maybe I'm not, right? I think Dr. Ann hit on something about this idea of capitalism and capitalism, this internalized capitalism that convinces us that only certain products are worth it, right? And ironically, while I believe that Black people need to go and see The Woman King, I also believe that everybody else needs to go sit down and see The Woman King as well, because it might inform us on how we can be better humans. So when I put this up against like Black Panther, which ironically, when you're watching The Woman King, you are seeing connections to Black Panther. You're like, oh, that's where they got that from. Oh, and this is why the room is set up this way. In very real ways, without a Dahomey, without the Agoji, you don't have a Black Panther. So how could it not do well? I mean, does this make sense to anybody here?
Well, it does, but I have to say, I don't know what the article was asking or saying about the surprise of the $19 million at the box office. But I was surprised that it did so well, only because in November, Black Panther will be coming out. You know how you wonder the impact of that. So that was my only piece to the surprise. But if I read a headline like this, I would think that the surprise would be just what we're saying in terms of a Black film with an all-female Black cast and with the producer being African American. How in the world? We just never thought that it would do this well. I don't know what the financial backing and the making of the movie and the backstory to all of that was, but that surprised. But I was, I have these cultural suspicions, guys. I just have my cultural suspicions like, ooh, should we have The Woman King come out at the same time? Wakanda Forever is going to be coming out in a month or so, because I want these films to do well. I want them to do well. And I worried about that. So I was so happy to see that The Woman King did do well at the box office, because I really do feel like Wakanda Forever is going to do well as well.
So I want to piggyback on what Dr. Tria, Dr. Ann, and Dr. Ramona have shared. And I want to go back to Deborah Gray White and talk about, I'm not shocked by the surprise, because this is a part of the unbroken master, pun intended, narrative. White supremacy is built on the backs of Black women. It's a right, R-I-T-E, and a right, R-I-G-H-T, of white supremacy in the fullness of white supremacy, patriarchy, heteronormativity, of colonizing, subjugating, and brutalizing every orifice and every aspect of Black women's identities. From breeding us to reproduce commodities, right? Changing their own laws of inheritance and succession, only in the case of children begotten by enslaved African descent women and white men to inherit the status of the mother, to the entire field of the gynecological field in the United States is literally built on the backs of Black enslaved women and their children. That literally generations of white children, particularly of privilege, owe their lives to the enforced wet nursing of Black enslaved women whose own children experienced astronomical rates of mortality that we still see to this day. I mean, I could go on and on. So this is the 22nd century kind of, or the 21st century, 2022 way of framing white supremacy and the linchpin and the cornerstone of it being built on the backs, on the wombs, on the vaginas, on the breasts of Black women. So they don't want to come out and just with their whole chest, 10 toes down, and own that. We're in the age of, I'm going to throw rocks and hide my hands. I want to have it both ways. You don't get to have it both ways with me. And you don't get to
Mary, that is why. That's why I couldn't relax. That's why I couldn't relax.
And I feel that so much. And I heard about, now I also understand the phenomena of the Black male version of incels, which is the manosphere. And I've been following that and tracking that for some time. And I believe that unfortunately, those who have a platform and who are very vocal are punching down. Black men, to overcompensate in many instances against white supremacy, are doubling down on patriarchy, and they're punching down on Black women. That's so. And Dr. Ramona, I also intentionally chose not to watch the critiques until after I saw the film for exactly that purpose. And I will say this as a critique. I will say that the Dahomey warriors really displayed a wide range of femininity, of womanhood, versus the wives of the king. The wives of the king, I was like, I want to really unpack the historic research and evidence, because they were almost depicted either as being very silent or as being very catty and grasping. I mean, they literally had Viola Davis pitted against one of the wives as like pick-me's, right? In a 21st century, 2022 kind of context. And I'm like, ooh, I can, if there are critiques about this, I believe this is valid. We need to see that full range of humanity and being multidimensional, multifaceted humans, and how that depicts Black femininity on the part of the absolutely drop dead gorgeous, more kind of conventionally beautiful women who were the wives. To me, they were not afforded the same kind of full humanity as the warriors were. And I understand it was a movie specifically about these warriors, and I would push back on that. So I feel you there, Dr. Ramona, and y'all are inspiring me to go to see it again, because I only saw it once.
I think that also shows our culture. I think it's all those pieces that we all have spoken about. It's embedded in our culture as women in communities that we live, and the classism that we have in our groups. You know, who has the bigger house, the nicer car, the expensive shoes, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This man wants me because, and he doesn't want you because. It's the pieces that all fit very nice and neatly to our current culture, from neighborhood to community, from white to Black. With this 19 million at the box office, I didn't go see the movie when everybody was going to see it, when they were having these movie watch parties. First of all, I was out of town, and I just got back literally and went out to see it the next day in the theater. I think it was only 3 blacks in the whole theater. And so the people that were cheering along with us, I say us, meaning people that look like us, were people that didn't look like me. So a piece, when we spoke about capitalism, I see buffoonery as a piece that we're not speaking to, because we're entertainment for people that don't look like us. Let's go see what's going on with this woman king and all these black folks. Let's just keep it real. Let's see what they're doing. How, it's just like when they go to say, Dr. Creston Wells wrote a book years ago called The Ices Paper, and how black people, we play with the big ball. White people play with the little ball, the golf ball. So this was like entertainment. It's almost like in the Greek warrior days, where you come to the stadium just to watch somebody get beheaded. What was really going to be seen here, it was enjoyed by others, and we look at it very historical. We look at it academically. We look at it very social. We look at it very humane and serious through health and other issues. But to others, they're looking at it as these are, a bunch of clowns running around acting silly, and we want to be entertained. I bet you if you ask someone else that came out the movies that didn't look like me, you would get a response that would just make you just want to pass out. But that King piece where he wanted to select, the question I would like to ask is, why did he want to choose the warrior woman, the woman who didn't know she was going to be the woman king, versus the very beautiful feminine wives that stood in waiting for the king to choose them for the evening or the day or the night? What happens when we're pitted against one another by a man and men? So these are things that have been trivialized, but bring truth to the forefront.
I saw, I'm glad you brought that up, because in that dimension, that piece of beauty to me, and this is how I felt. I felt there was some balance there. I really didn't. I was glad for the balance, because being a dark skinned African American woman, who can hold her own, and who has held her own physically, and then to see the king's wives and then see the warrior women, I felt a balance. I was afraid that the balance wouldn't be there, but I felt a balance there. And I'm so glad that I did. And then when I thought about the king choosing the woman king, the warrior, I thought about those other pieces to leadership that are important. I can now see that beauty wasn't the thing. It was those pieces of integrity and strength and determination, and the leadership qualities that won someone. The trust. Yes,
That's what he wanted. He wanted a woman he could trust.
And someone that kind of pushed back, but still respected. I think those pieces to who we are as African American women. But I also saw the strength in his wife too, although they showed the little manipulative piece there. But I still saw that there was a level of respect she felt she had, or a level of authority that she felt she had, that was there. So I was kind of happy about there was some sort of balance for me in that when others see our film, when others see it. And I'm like you, in saying, how are they looking at this movie when they're cheering? It's a movie of war. It's a war movie. It's a war movie. But to us, it was so much deeper than that. So much deeper than that. So maybe the next time I see it, the second time I see it, I'll see a war movie.
Kara, really quickly, can I jump in here really quick because I want to provide historical context,
Yes.
just really quickly. So in choosing a woman king, there is this thing called Dahomean dualism, right? And so you see Gezo, right? So not just John Boyega, but Gezo, the king, who's an actual king, who actually starts to lean back towards this idea of dualism. And dualism says this, that one is not stronger without the other. And anything that creates an imbalance, so if we're putting men against women or women are greater than men, what it does is it makes both of us weak, right? So in choosing a woman king, the woman king had to be the equal of the actual king. And it's not just in like this main leadership role for those of y'all who are watching, it's in every aspect of life. So if there is a woman general, there is also a male counterpart to that as well. And it all stems back to two of the siblings, right? They both, I think their names were Abeja and uh, uh, I'm gonna screw up her name, but it was like a male and a female, and they were twins in the kingdom of Dahomey, right? And twins, these two twins actually symbolize this dualism that exists in this society. So I think that in choosing the warrior or this very strong woman who, and make no mistakes, the wives were very political, if you caught that. But in choosing the warrior, it's about who's going to, as Professor Curtis says, who is going to balance? Who is going to balance that position? So I just wanted to make sure that we put that out there because Gezo the king is the one who returns Dahomey back to this traditional viewpoint, right? Because prior to this, you had kings who were selling black bodies into slave trades, right? And that's historically accurate. So I just wanted to jump in and just add that piece as we are thinking about why is a strong person there. And I also want to say that femininity, whatever that may be, has multiple expressions. Like strength, these women were revered, right? So the part where we see people not looking upon the agoge as they're walking through, that's an actual thing that happens because they were so revered. So I just wanted to put that point out there as we move into boycotts.
Well, and I think that's a really important perspective to have before we talk about the boycott, because first of all, I think that there are a couple different rationales behind boycotting the film that were shared. But the one that's the most striking to me, particularly based on the conversation that we've had thus far about the film, is the suggestion of boycotting it for being historically inaccurate. And I mean, it's almost laughable considering the conversation we've had thus far about the multiple layers at which this film has striven to be honest with history, although it is a based on true events film, which means it's not entirely going to be accurate. And that is set up in that distinction that was openly stated before the film was released. But all of those different layers of truth and Afrocentric or Black or African realism in terms of confronting the realities of our culture was encouraged to be ignored through that presentation of boycotting it. So I'd like to just dive right in. Dr. Curtis, I'll start with you since you were the first to bring up that response to the calls for boycott. What did you hear about why the film should be boycotted, and what was your response to that?
Well, what you brought up was the historic pieces to the Dahomey tribe. Am I pronouncing that correctly? And I felt, so for me, I did not feel that this was a documentary, first of all, and how many historical films have we had that did not get it exactly right. And the intent of the film was just that it was portraying and paying homage to this female warrior tribe and those customs of a culture that are to be celebrated, that are a piece of who we are. Yes. And I felt like, and because of the intra boycott within the African American community, I was so hurt because we understand that there are so many of us who look at that film, and we look at that film as a point of pride, as a point of celebrating our culture. We know that there is a dark history in our culture. We know within that. We know about the Middle Passages and what that looked like. But for those of us going to the movies, this is not, again, I say, this is not a documentary. So we're going to the movie to watch a Hollywood movie that is somewhat art imitating life, but it is not a documentary. It was not portrayed to get it as a documentary. It showed all the things that we've talked about, the generational upbringing of different women and the strength of the women, the cultural, the culture of this particular tribe. All of those pieces were there, and you really think folks are going to this movie to look at it as a historical piece.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what they're going to see. And so that hurt me. That piece hurt me because this is a film. And that hurt me because there are so many other good reasons to watch this film. There's so many great reasons, which we talked about, to watch the film. Who produced it? Who starred in it? When you think about Hollywood, what's the impact now of Hollywood? You saw the surprise that that this film did so well. Those are the pieces that are to be celebrated about this movie. And so I was taken aback. I really was. And I was like, oh, here we go again, African American women. Can't catch a break. And so I wish, like Dr. Allen said, I wish I had gone to the movie before I read, or was one of us talked about, I wish I had gone to the movie before I read The Boycott, because I was like, okay, I'm waiting to see what's happening here. And if I felt, as a person who has not studied pre-Middle Passages as in depth as our African American professors have studied this culture, would I even think of this movie as that? I didn't expect to even hear in the movie, after reading the issues of The Boycott, I didn't expect to even hear that the selling of their people was going to be even depicted. I thought it was not going to be. So the fact that it was in the film made me even more angry with The Boycott, because it was there. Those pieces were there. They tried to be as accurate as possible in making this film. But again, I say it's not a documentary. So if you can't appreciate the culture of survival of a community of people, if you can't look and see what's being portrayed within the intersectionality of strength and warriorism and beauty and all of that, if you can't see those things and you want to call a boycott, in the way that we have supported and been the backbone of this culture, and you really want to call a boycott to a movie that's not intended to be historically accurate, but to give those elements of what was happening during that time, it saddened me. It saddened me after I watched it.
I want to jump in really quickly because of everything that you just shared, Dr. Curtis. Zora Neale Hurston, Sister Zora, already said it. All skin folk and kinfolk. And at this point, you know, scholars, it is starting to make its way into social media, is talk about the white gaze. And at this point, to me, it's not just the white gaze, it's the white supremacist gaze, right? It's the anti-Blacks gaze that's been internalized because of so much conditioning. Now, 500 years, give or take a few, is actually still a blip, even in the time span of modern humanity. And for us as individual human beings and right as collectives throughout generations, it's a really long time for this conditioning to be in place. And at this point, with this film in particular, because I knew that it was not a documentary like you shared, I knew, I was like, not only am I not, I'm going to kind of put on blinders when it comes to the white gaze, I'm going to put on blinders when it comes to this boycott and the white supremacist gaze, and also the misogynoir, the anti-Black womanness. I've been monitoring and following misogynoir and white supremacy that is perpetrated by Black men and women in particular. And I said, for this one, I'm going to go on a Friday when I have the whole weekend to kind of just soak it in and marinate in it. I wanted to go by myself. Now I feel ready to actually go with other companions. I really needed to see it by myself first. And I'm really disappointed and not surprised that even though this film is not a documentary, that they would I'm like, well, you can't, even in a film that's not a documentary, even in a film that's loosely based on historical accuracy, we don't have this elite guard of all women warriors without colonization at this particular juncture in history, when in 1831, and without the transatlantic slave trade. You literally cannot, there is no agauge without that, right? You just can't even make a film without at least touching upon that. So the fact that the boycott would misrepresent and just lie and not show the connection between the fact that as an historian, no groups, Europeans could not penetrate the interior of the continent of Africa. They couldn't do it. The same way that they were able to decimate indigenous people in what is current day Canada, the US, right, Mexico, Central and South America, because of it was really mainly because of all of the communicable diseases that they brought, that these groups had no built-in resistance to. That was not just smallpox. It was bringing rats over in the ships, bringing dogs over in the ships with rabies and with the Black Plague. And the continent of Africa and the interior of the continent in particular was literally not susceptible, because modern humanity evolves out of sub-Saharan Africa. We have the sub-Saharan Africans have the greatest degree of genetic diversity to this day, which is how genetic evolutionary scientists actually age, not just human beings, but all species. So there was complicity, right? I mean, and if you're an historian, you know this. It's like Europeans needed that, and that's why we see everything happening on the coast. But so for them to mislead, for social media and the boycott to be based on such an outright lie, we cannot tear down the master's house with the master's tools. So at least step correct and be accurate and go see the movie before they speak on it.
The question here is it historically inaccurate or is it misogynoir? Is it historically inaccurate or is it patriarchy? Is it historically inaccurate or is this internalized white supremacy? And so when we say white supremacy, we're talking about this power structure, this hegemonic or this like common thing that says this is the universal standard for how stories must be told, how life must be lived. And so if we go back to this concept of like, y'all just gonna sit up here and not tell the truth after you see all the work, because the boycott doesn't just impact the authors. It also sullies the name of all the people who did the work to make sure it was accurate, to make sure the tunics and the shorts and the swords, which are not machetes, like a lot of people are calling them that. That's not what they are. But to make sure how accurate it was, it really just kind of like dismisses all of the work that happened. It also dismisses the 7-year fight to actually get this movie to screen. It dismisses the allies or the accomplices, whatever you want to call them, these two white women who were like, this story must be told. Here are the people. It dismisses the fight that it took to have the representation of beautiful Black women in this film who are not the palatable Black women that sell films. It dismisses all of that. So for this argument to be like, it's historically inaccurate, is it? Or is this you throwing rocks and hiding your hands under the guise of historical inaccuracy? Or is it really just your patriarchy showing? Is it your privilege showing? Is it your internalized white supremacy showing? So I just wanted to add that in here because this is the underlying question. These are the currents that are happening. And I just wanted to lay that out for everyone.
I don't think we should overlook also the fact that Hollywood was giving Viola Davis her time to shine, to give her her platform, because this is something artistically and creatively that she wanted to do to represent culture in movies. I think this piece of it lies within her heart and soul and her passion and the leverage that she's finally has gotten in being given a credibility and an okay to say, okay, this is going to be for you. This is going to be your opportunity to shine, to be a leading voice, to be a lead role, and to speak to what she's always wanted to do. I mean, she prepared for this role in many ways, athletically, through her eating, training, etc. I mean, if you heard all her interviews, I'm sure you did see her interviews on different Oprah, Today Show, and et cetera, she was very passionate about doing this. I mean, she was strong in her messaging. And this, you have to give it to Viola to say Hollywood executives put money to the message, to the powerful piece that I think that she feels like she never had a voice in as it comes to her art and her role as an actress in Hollywood over the years, such as Sidney Poitier. You know, I read both of those books back to back, and they were very similar in being denied opportunities to have a voice in film and industry.
Let's talk about, and I love the conversation that we've had so far about misogynoir and the placement of particularly Black women in Hollywood. and representation in film and television. So I'd like to just open for a conversation about the traditional roles that Black women have been given in film, and how this film um, uh, stands contrary to those roles, how it takes us to a new place when it comes to potential representation of ourselves and our femininity and our identity in film. I just recently was on a short business trip and got to see a art exhibit of Black film posters and music posters called Caldonia. And one of the headings on, or captions on, one of the posters for a film was talking about the fact that the film was the story of a Black woman was the star, but the poster featured a Black man with her as like a figure about this big on the side of his picture, and how that was so symbolic of the relegation to, even in their starring roles, Black women came secondary. In Black films, they came secondary to Black men. In Hollywood, they just came secondary to anyone and everyone. So how does this film change that paradigm? Or does it?
I as an African American woman, and seeing the way we're portrayed, I don't mind showing them that we're multifaceted. Just don't stick us in a box. So, we do come from so many different levels and backgrounds, and yeah, there's some roles we've had where we are um servants to others, but that's not just who we are. And there are other roles that we get where we're attacking someone, with a show enough girl in the film, and that may be one piece of us too. Uh, and then there are other pieces that show so much of our pain, but please tell our whole story and tell it in an accurate way, and don't put us in a box where we can only be told in this way. And that's what I liked about this film, because it wasn't a comedy, or it wasn't. I was in a meeting this week discussing what we're going to do for Women's History Month, and the movie The Help came up. And when I tell you, it took everything I had to say. We're not showing the help. We're not showing the help, because I think even to this day we're still stuck in that box. Even though we know that we have seen Black women in other roles, but the most comfortable when it comes to this whole ideal of the price of the movie and normalizing whiteness. These are the movies that others want to show of us, versus movies that show our strength of character in other realms. And I don't mind The Help. I love The Help. I watched The Help, but I want to see more. Don't stick us in a box, because you've seen The Help, you've seen other movies too. That you've seen one of those, you've seen them all. But to see The Woman King, you haven't seen anything else like this. You haven't seen those pieces of us. You haven't seen these the strength and beauty in the strength, the beauty in the strength of someone who's fighting for her people and for justice and for right. And you haven't seen that piece to us in that context of The Woman King, where she rises and becomes the queen in a non-white normalized standard of beauty. We are there, and she is there with a mate. And those are the things I don't mind showing us, but show all of us. And that's why I found comfort in this being a Black owned producer, publishing house, a production, because I think that was there. That was what was there in that. And I felt that. So I don't shy around. I don't say don't show all of our story, but show less of that box you put us in. Show us in our true light, in our true self. And I think that's a story only we as Black women can tell. I really, truly do. I feel like that we are the only ones who think critically about this movie. When we sat in that movie and watched Woman King, though, we're making sure, because we got to live this truth when we leave out of here. We got to live this truth when we walk out of this movie. Don't think this was just about what was up on that screen. When we walk out this movie and we walk into society, we have to live that truth and let us tell our story.
Kara, could you please repeat the question? Because like my brain is shooting off in all these areas, and I want to make sure that we answer the question, because Professor Curtis over here preaching, and I'm like, yes, and
I will admit I fully got into what you were saying, Professor Curtis, and so if I can remember the question, I will try. But I also just want to say, I mean, wherever you all take this conversation, I think it's going to be a brilliant conversation. So please don't worry about if you don't answer a question. But I believe the question at heart was just addressing the typical place where Black women in particular have been relegated in film. What has that place been, and how does this film counter that, or give us a new paradigm to use when it comes to the portrayal of Black women in film? What's shifting, or even I think part of the question was, has it actually shifted? Can we use this film as saying that there's been a paradigm shift, or is that maybe giving it too much, putting too much on this one film?
This might be the first film where I have actually seen this idea by Molefi Asante, Afrocentrism, on display. Not the entire movie, because I'm like, what is this Portuguese dude doing here? But this is probably the first film where we are not using a Western gaze or a white gaze to then paint how these women should be portrayed, how they should be acting. There is a scene in this film where Nansiska, which is Viola Davis's character, has to make a decision to either protect her mental well-being, right, in imagining this future and wanting the kingdom of Dahomey to survive, or to sit pretty on a throne next to a king that is now her equal, so to speak, but not really. Or does she protect her mental well-being and do what is right in her heart? And I don't know that I have seen movies that actually play with that duality or what that looks like. I will also say that I'm not sure that I have ever seen a movie where no one is coming to save Black women, right? Look at Dr. Rolfe. She's like, tag me in, tag me in. I don't think that we've ever seen that. And if I can just go back really quickly to this idea of a boycott, we are around here, and I have seen people talking about protect Black women, protect Black women. Well, protecting Black women also means allowing them to be their full authentic selves, historically, contemporarily. And this is probably one of the ways, like in some of the vitriol, like in reacting to, I can't believe you would portray Black women this way, it's not historically accurate, that we're not honoring or protecting the legacy of Black women. But this might be the first film that has the majority of what Africana critical theory talks about, which is the critiquing of society and the imagining and fighting for liberation and better futures, where Afrocentricity says we are the subject of our history and not objectified. This might be the first film where I actually see that prominent in not just what's on screen, but also what's behind the screen as well. So, are we going to tear down the tropes of Black womanhood with one film? Absolutely not. We've been in this thing for a long time. However, this film then allows us to imagine, well, not us, because, Big Mama was a superhero in our house, right? But it allows others to be like, well, what could this be other than what I have been socialized to believe? That might be my response.
Would you say, and Dr. Roof, I want to bring you into the conversation here after this question, but Dr. Allen, in thinking about this, would you call this the first commercially successful film that's done that? As you were speaking to that, I was thinking of the title just escaped me, Daughters of the Dust, and the unique portrayal of particularly Blackness that film had, and womanhood and sisterhood and all of those things put together in a story that was very it was just a Black story. I mean, we were the center of that narrative, but it did not enjoy the commercial success that this film currently is having. And so I just wonder at the distinction and how we approach, those different kind of eras in representation and the ability to have that voice. I think going back to what Dr. Hart was saying, the support of Hollywood in allowing this to happen at the same time as you have the dual narrative, I think, of, on one hand, the support that was shown for this film, on the other hand, before it's even released, being called to boycott from critics who are countering that level of support. So there's so many different things going on, but that just kind of ran through my head.
Yeah, I'll jump in, Kira. So this is these two great questions, and I'm constantly thinking about context. I'm constantly thinking about what's happening in the larger culture, socially, politically, economically. And I think about the massive success of the quote unquote superhero genre, of the Marvel universe, that Sister Tria, like of the DC universe. I think about the success of, for example, well, at least the first Wonder Woman film, and actually the first real woman on primetime TV that really resonated with me, as being born at the end of 1968 and coming of age and being a young child in the 70s, and not seeing not seeing the representation, not just of Black women, but of tall women. I mean, was actually masculinized. That's a whole nother. So I'll get into the tropes in a minute, but like that resonated with me. And when I saw this film, not only did I observe that it did not perpetuate the really historically based tropes of Mammy or Sapphire, because it wasn't about the neck rolling and the teeth sucking, and how these elements of our expression have been caricatured and stigmatized. Not the Mammy, not the Sapphire trope, not the tragic mulatta trope. And because of how the relationship was handled between the kind of archetypal figure of the ongoing legacy of the Dahomey once they forcibly crossed the Atlantic, with the man who was half Portuguese and had a Dahomean mother, the Jezebel trope also was not perpetuated. And I really appreciated that. And I'll get back to that in a minute. What I also felt so empowered, because I was like, Black women, we don't have to create superheroes. We don't have to fall back on the mythological island of Lesbos and the Amazons. We are that, and we are actually the full range of womanhood in all of its facets, in all of its flavors. And that is so indescribably affirming to me. And that's what I don't know why other people were watching, and perhaps as gladiator sport, as for the girls, for the young girls and the teenage girls in that theater with me. I believe everything is energy, and I felt that energy. And it wasn't about this kind of fetishized, curated experience for them. What I will say in terms of having Portugal represented was, I could not stop thinking about Dahomey and its current day Benin, and of all of the Africans from Benin in particular who were kidnapped and enslaved in Brazil, which to this day has the largest population of people of African descent outside of the continent itself. And what those kidnapped individuals brought with them to this Western hemisphere was the Orisha, was our beauty. Our language is not Ebonics, it's African American vernacular English that has structure, right? That has components that literally derive from the languages from West Africa. Our music, our dance, our soul, our swag. They couldn't take that away. They couldn't stamp that out. They couldn't kidnap that out. They couldn't beat it out. They couldn't rape it out. And so that's how this film really affirmed for me, and was one small step into challenging those, those tropes, or just like, as Sister Tria was saying, as the backdrop, as the prop, as the best friend, as the sassy, funny girlfriend, no, we are the subjects. We are at the center of our own stories. And we don't have to rely on fantasy. And as important as mythology is, right, we don't have to resort to that. It is who we are. It is in our DNA. And it has literally been passed down. And I'm going to go see it again. That's all I have to say about that.
I think that Viola Davis was perfect. Just hearing you speak, Viola Davis was so perfect for this part. I don't know another actress in Hollywood who could do that. And I think that she validated who we are when she played in How to Get Away with Murder, because there's a scene in How to Get Away with Murder. We've already built her up. We know she's a strong, courageous professor that's complicated and all. But there was one scene where she took the lashes off a little by little. She took her lipstick off. She took her time. Y'all know that? Did y'all see that scene? And she took that wig off. And I mean, when I tell you, I hollered, because that's us. That's us. That's educated. That's complicated. That's down to earth. That's real. That's, all of these pieces. She was ready for that. So, I mean, that was one of my things when I said Viola Davis is playing this. I don't know another actress that could have pulled it off. I just, she was ready for that, and she did that for us. And my fears of normalizing the price, I didn't want that movie to pay a price of normalizing whiteness for us as African American women and that standard of beauty. I was really worried about that. But she, if anyone else could pull it off, she pulled it off. She pulled it off.
And I skipped over a slide because I'm trying to honor our time and appreciate you all going a bit beyond our time. But this was an interesting conversation that Dr. Allen, you kind of kicked off for us before the session started on the constraints of white femininity. And I wonder if you would kick that off for us again now for our audience tonight, and just speak into what this means and the context of it in terms of comparing that to what we've been talking about with the Woman King and Black femininity.
I guess, okay, so where I want to start with this is like within the context of the United States, when we say Black women are strong, what we are saying is that's not a compliment, right? When we say that they are resilient, that's not a compliment at all, right? Because the question is like, well, why do they have to be strong? And why do they have to be resilient, right? And so we're not saying like in terms of Black femininity that we don't get to have these things. But what we are saying is those are in direct relation to something that is not even considered human. So then when we take these brilliant Ogoje warriors who are the King's Guard, who are the protectors of their society, who are fierce and who are strong, these are not the same concepts at all. They are strong because they practice, and that practice does not cease at all. So then when we bring in the constraints of white femininity, right? Even when we think about the feminist movement in this country and where it stems from, it's built off of the emancipation of enslaved folks. It's built off of wanting to have the same rights to vote as Black men. It has nothing to do with the fierceness and the protection of a society by Black women. So then when we take the constraints of Western civilization, feminism or anything else, and then we say, well, this movie is they're not really feminine, that they're actually puppets or they're anything else, we are automatically, making the kingdom of Dahomey the subject of Western scholarship. And you can't do that and clearly understand why it's there. So we started this concept, I introduced this idea of Dahomean duality, right? This idea that gender roles in a developing society, right? So we go, and I don't mean like they're poor. I mean, we go from hunter-gatherers to pastoralists or horticulturalists to agriculturalists, like this sociologic development of society, the idea that we've developed language, that we can live together. Gender roles are not the same as Western society at all. We are not saying that as a function of me being a woman, that I am only relegated to the kitchen or the domestic sphere. Those are gender roles in Western society. Gender roles in Dahomean and indigenous pre-colonial African society was really about how do we keep our community intact, and what is the division of labor that happens. Women just happen to do this work. Well, in Dahomey, we see something relatively different. So the author, his name is Alpern, he says, they were called Black Spartans. And the difference was, we reared Greek Spartan women to be strong, to have strong warriors. Dahomean women were created to slash those warriors in half, right? And it was feminine. It was brilliant. But if we take the constraints of Western civilization and then we try and understand a community, we completely erase this idea of duality, which says we need both to be strong. And I think that even if you fall into that trap, again, you miss the brilliance and the multiple layers of this movie. And you also miss the beautiful ways that feminism, whatever that may mean to people, even if it was a concept then, how that shows up in a society. Not everybody in the society was a warrior, right? You had the wives, you had the farmers, you had skilled artisans, all of these people who are doing their part to ensure that their community survives. And this is why the argument of, well, what about white femininity, the constraints of white femininity, it's such a lazy argument. I don't know if lazy is the right word, but it's so like, get that out of here. Like, what does that have to do with what's going on right here and right now? Women were actually valued in certain kingdoms. Why? Because they could actually expand. So even when we think of or trans-Saharan slave trades, women were valuable. People being taken primarily from the Gold Coast, as they called it, were men, because the concepts of gender in Europe and other places was that men were strong and that's who we want to like build communities. Well, Arab slave trade, trans-Saharan slave trade, they were like, no, give us the women. Women build kingdoms.
Dr. Rofe, I want to come to you because you spoke earlier about just the multiplicity of gender and the lack of that kind of two-gendered system that exists outside of Western culture. So what's your perspective on this? And I'm going to advance the slide because I think we're kind of talking about both things at once as we get into that capability of particularly Black women to exude both beauty and strength and all of the multitude of representations and identities and parts of our identity. So please.
Yeah, thank you, Kara. And I mean, so I want to frame this in terms of, and I learned this in a program, a Black transnational feminist program in Cachoeira, Brazil, in the northeastern part of Brazil, Bahia, which is known as Little Africa, because that's really actually for a country that really, I mean, it's overwhelmingly of African descent, and this is a hub of that demographic. And I was schooled, and rightfully so, on pre-colonization societies and civilizations and empires that had ranged for thousands of years all over the globe, whether we're talking about the continent of Africa, whether we're talking about current day North and Central and South America, whether we're talking about Asia, and that many societies created gender that went far beyond what's called the gender binary as we know it, that is a direct legacy of colonization and ongoing colonialism. There have been hate crimes where I teach in California targeting members of the LGBTQIA plus community, with one being a faculty member, a professor on the campus. And yet, it wasn't that there were non-societies that did not have a binary gender construction of male, female, masculine, feminine. It's just that the entire range existed. If we just look at US-based Native America or Turtle Island, Two-Spirit, which goes far beyond Western notions of transgender. There is no there is no superimposition of what Two-Spirit encompasses. It's an entire spectrum within itself. Or we can talk about current day Indonesia, where there were 5 to 6 constructions of gender identities. Or we can talk about the Hijra in India for 2,000+ years, where there were as a third gender. So I say, and so when we hone in and narrow in to constraints of white femininity, and we talk about the onslaught of colonization, and we understand that this was in the context of England, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Victorian England couldn't get any more constrictive when it came to the binary gender. So women as weak physically, women as weak intellectually, women as literally within the perspective of social eugenics, of pseudo race science, which also extended into gender, and as and social eugenicists believing that anyone who what we would like cisgender born as a biological woman was inherently biologically immutably inferior physically, emotionally, intellectually, psychologically. And this is, as Sister Tria was referring to, this is such a significant and toxic paradigm shift from recognizing the full integration of the duality, from recognizing the important roles in the entire range of however a pre-colonial society and civilization constructed gender, whether it was on a binary or along a spectrum or continuum. It was also recognizing the sanctity and the critical role that however the gender was constructed, the critical role played by every member of that collective. And then for me, we get to honing in on the Dahomey. And when I was doing my research to first teach about them in 2012, and according to the research that I found, I mean, it's old, I'm sure that it's been updated or will be after this, is that the king specifically actually chose members of the elite force based on beauty and strength. And I was like, what? Women, beauty, and strength? The coexistence of beauty and strength in women? That is absolutely not how Victorian England and then the colonial British Empire, and now the imperial US and Western world constructs femininity. It's the opposite. And so I was really captured by this. And I would say that for me, this also is really about the sacred feminine, the sacred masculine, and everything on that continuum. And it's about the inherent intrinsic beauty of inner strength, because that, to me, that is the character arc of Viola Davis's role and ultimate ascension to woman king. She's undeniably very strong physically. She's real stoic, right? She's like, we don't have time for tears. But that's her arc. She reconnects with her vulnerability. She literally relives her trauma at the hands of toxic masculinity, of the degradation of the feminine through gender-based violence. That's how I frame that, right? So her arc to me is so much more about inner strength, about vulnerability, because the way that she's depicted, and it is, to me, conforms very much to Western notions of masculinity and of toxic masculinity. And I really appreciate that arc that shows her journey into, to me, what is really about becoming more than just a soldier and becoming a warrior, a spiritual warrior. And it actually is based much more so on fully integrating the sacred femininity, of the vulnerability, of the receptivity, of literally the mother, the creative force, the womb. So that's, right within that larger context of a lot of this whole talk, like colonization has worked a number on the whole world. And to me, all of the constructions of white masculinity and white femininity are really about toxic femininity and toxic masculinity. So throw all that away.
Can I also just add here really quickly? When you have the Dahomey and Franco War, one of the things that make the French keep coming back to attack and ultimately destroy, right, the Dahomean kingdom, because they placed in a puppet king, is they could not go home and allow the structure of Dahomey and these gender roles to exist, because it challenged the notion of this like idea of new imperialism that, you know, in all of these empires. So if we allow this to exist, it flies in the face of everything that we have been preaching for years, even in the Victorian era. Like, there's no way that women can be this strong. And so this is one of the things that like continuously had them come back, even though in that last war there was like 1,200 Dahomean or Agoji who go out to battle alongside you know, all the other warriors in the kingdom, and only 50 to 60 to survive. Now this is the important part of how do you remember your battle, because the Agoji were not like we lost. The Agoji were like we made them run, and we are still 50 strong standing. Right? So this idea of beauty and strength cannot exist in the colonial period, because it flies in the face of everything, as Dr. Rofe was saying, British imperialism, French imperialism, Spanish and Portuguese imperialism. So if we allow them to stay in place, then what does that say about all the nonsense, this toxic masculinity, this toxic femininity that we are passing off as societal norms, when we get our behinds handed to us in the first Dahomean War by women? Just thought it's historically accurate.
Dr. Hart? You're on mute.
Extemporaneous response to it all, same question, or what?
Both. So same question, and then I think to be honoring of you guys' time, we'll wrap up after. But just your thoughts on the beauty and strength depicted through the film, and of the Dahomey and all of that. Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make it brief because the sisters that spoke before me, I don't want to be repetitive. I just say 3 snaps and a clap. You can hear the spar on. It was beyond my expectations, and I'm sure many others. The beauty comes in all shades and colors, and beauty is not just in what you see, it's what you do and how you do it. The respectability, the comfort, you know, the core center of your morality, the humanistic views, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and the respect that you have for one another, including men. And the pieces that weren't shown in there was the respect or disrespect, how they dealt with the disrespect of the Portuguese, the Anglo-Saxons who were there. I think that Viola mastered this beyond any producers in terms of getting this message across and everything that she put into it. She was the ultimate actress who could have pulled this off, even though I think there's another one that I favor a lot, and I think she could have done the second greatest piece in that, and that's Angela Bassett. I think Angela would have been awesome in that as well. You know, she's physically fit, you know, and she's strong, and she's courageous, and she's powerful. You know, I wish that she could have been in that, in that, this show, that beauty and strength as well. Because if she can slide in Adrienne Warren, she could have slid in Angela Bassett, and that would have just been dynamic. Because I love that woman, and I'm sure there are a few others that could have gone in there. I mean, Taiji Henson. I mean, she could have gone in there as well. I mean, just to pack them all in there. And she could have had supporting actresses in there and put the 5 of us in there. You know, nobody would know the difference. We could have backed it up and did what we needed to do. But, you know, I just say that this is something that I would like for girls in high school and college who are very insecure about their looks and their color and their hair and other insecurities that they suppress and oppress. And being a high school administrator and a superintendent of schools for 12 years, I've seen so much of harm that women and young girls have do to themselves because they don't feel like they have those role models at home who can give them that image, and to have to rely on false pieces to supplement their appearance. And I think this is something they should see as well. I've seen it one time, Dr. Curtis. I'm going to go see it 2 or 3 more times, but we have to live with the skin we're in, and not be so comfortable with all the facade that you think you need to get somebody's attention and to be beautiful. So I would do this as an educator in the system for over 40 years. I want to just bring Black women, Black young girls, and say this is where beauty really is. It's not what you see, it's how you portray yourself and what you emit back to others and how you carry yourself. So that's the way I would summarize that in my brevity.
Dr. Hart, I love what you're saying. Right now we're working in a high school. We have a program for high school students where they take college classes. But that whole piece, that generational piece in the movie, had me looking forward to today and thinking about today and how that impacts the self-esteem, the healthy racial self-concept of our young girls. And I love the generational pieces in this movie because, reading research there, the number of African American girls who are thinking and committing suicide is on the rise. However, Black women, some of the space research where Black women have the lowest rates, even in the world, of suicide. So when you talk about colonizing these things, fast forwarding today, what is it generationally that we can take from this movie to empower those young girls today? To empower those young girls today, and that's the piece in that research is showing 2 things, and those 2 things came out in the movie of why African American women have these lower rates of suicide. It has nothing to do with our self-efficacy to go to professional help because they don't know our story, but it is our community among each other and our faith. Our community among each other as Black women, supporting each other as Black women. And we've got to teach that to our young girls. That was emulated in the movie, and I love that. And that's what we need because that's troubling. And so I appreciate you, Dr. Hart, bringing it up. And that's why when I go see movies like this, I have a pause because I know we have to walk out of that movie and think about how it's going to be impacting us in society today.
Closing thoughts then from Dr. Rofe and Dr. Allen.
Thank you for inviting me here tonight. What you just shared, Dr. Curtis, and what everyone has just shared is that community of sisterhood, of true sisterhood, is what you all have provided me with and welcomed me into. And it is absolutely what I needed. And it reaffirms my faith in God, Goddess, all that is, and all of the ancestors, because I really needed it.
I think that this conversation, I'm super excited to go and see this again. And, you know, when we saw it the first couple of times, like there was no one in the theater for whatever reason. It just wasn't a popular movie at all. But I think I'm more interested now to go back and look and take this conversation in with me to see what else I can learn about, to see what small, intricate details that maybe I missed the first 4 times seeing it, um, to go deeper into it. I also think that, you know, we're talking about a widespread area of things, but the other thing that like dawns on me is that there is something in here about leadership, about mentorship, and we haven't dug into those conversations. So it makes me go, okay, well, let's look a little bit further. I think Professor Curtis mentioned this about, it's not about, you know, strength. It's really about these other characteristics of leadership that are even more important than just kind of like the physical aesthetic or what's popular. So I'm really excited to dig further into this as I've heard some of the critiques that came from this group of brilliance. So I hope everyone goes and sees it too.
Well, thank you all so much. This was such a rich and enriching and just mind wealth building conversation. I mean, absolutely beautiful and I think so timely and important, especially in terms of, you know, this is us launching the new season of the Live Black Experience community dialogues. And we've started with 2 powerhouse conversations. And this is just a reminder of the work that we're doing to bring these conversations not just to Flagstaff, but to all those who are watching and participating and coming to a deeper understanding of what it means to have that lived Black experience, what it means for us culturally to see the wholeness of our identities represented in film and in discourse and in conversations and mentorship, and all of those ways that we can be engaged and be able to be our full selves in society and amongst ourselves. It's so important. And so I'm so thankful to each of you for being part of this conversation tonight. Thank you to anyone and everyone who joined in and watched tonight or who will come back and watch again in the future. This conversation, it's so important for you to be part of it and to share in this story with us. So we appreciate your presence. We hope that you'll join us again for our next conversation. And until then, we hope that you all go in grace. Good night.